Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Today, or this particular session, is about writing an NT service. I'm going to call it a basic guide, but it'll be enough to get you wet and interested in the non-UI side of Windows development, shall we say. My name is Tim, and I've been working with services for a very long time. Shall we say? I was writing software or services in particular to capture data from phone systems and other devices. And I've been using Delphi since it first came out. I'm not quite sure when I would have. Before I was using Delphi, I would have been using doing C programming with TSRs. So this sort of thing I am quite familiar with. And I guess if you want to have a look at what we'll be talking about today, we're going to look at what is an NT service, why might we want to write one. We're going to also gonna be writing an NT service as well, and in that regard we are going to be looking at this a simple file purger service. I've got a little note here about whether or not we should interact with the desktop, and I'm going to say you don't. We'll also look at the properties and the events that we get through Delphi to make writing a service easier for us. How to install and remove, how to start and stop, and a few other little bits as we go along. So, basically, I guess the first question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is an NT service? Now, if you've ever gone into your Windows Service Control Panel applet, you'll see a whole list of things, programs, like they will be let's say there's an Adobe Update Manager there. You'll have Microsoft Defender there. These are all programs that run in the background. They're long-running programs, and they do not present the user with any sort of user interface. They also run, and therefore they also run independently of any particular user sessions. So that means they will also start when the machine starts up, and that means before a user is logged in. So it does mean then that your program can actually function while no one is at the computer. Other examples you will find of an NT service will be like a printer, a spooler, a web server. Like I said, you've got your antivirus software and other database servers. And the main difference I think you'll find between, say, an NT service and other applications is that, like I said, these are programs that run in the background. They do not have user interface, but you also think about, well, somehow I need to be able to present the user with information, so how can we do that? And then the next thing to consider then is, when should I be, when should I write a service, I guess, is another question you can ask yourself. Not every particular task, needs to be implemented as a service. However, I would say that if it is something that you need to be running, let's say when a user is not logged in, well, that would be pointing you in the right direction. Also, then you will find that another way you can look at whether or not you need to write an NT service is when you need to make sure that it is running all the time, and let's say a user can't just quote unquote close it down on you and information gets lost perhaps. So and that goes into that idea of higher level security. Because I wouldn't say protects you wholly, but you can protect against accidental termination of your program if it were implemented as a service. So some things to consider there. Now, when it comes to a Delphi application, um, Delphi provides us as programmers with a good framework in which to write a service um, to accomplish a particular function. We don't have to write the boilerplate code to handle the installation, the uninstall type functions. Through the use of event handlers and properties, then we can just concentrate on the core functions of whatever our service needs to do. So in the case of, let's say, capturing data, say from a phone system, I can just worry about that function without having to worry about, well, what functions or do I need to call in order for my service to be installed. So the fact that we have this framework available to us, cuts down on some of the code that we need to write. Then, so to do that now, in order for us to now look at the what goes into a service, this might be a good time to go into Delphi before we start looking at the individual properties and so on. So just give me a moment and we'll see whether we can get into Delphi here. So just before we go on to that, if you look in the VCL manager here, service manager, you will find the different different structures and classes which make up that framework I was just mentioning to you. So when we have a service, and well, actually, we've already got one open. So what I might do here is to go through, how do I actually create a service, from scratch? And this particular task is very, very simple. So we'll just close everything down here. So File, New, and we'll select Other. And under Windows, under Delphi, there is a option for a Windows service. Just double click on that one. A message, in my case, pops up about, it uses or references the Visual Component Library. Do you want to enable it for this project? I will just say yes. And now we have the basics of a service, which we can now add onto. So if we go into Unit 1 here, we've got again that boilerplate code here, to which we can then add what we need. And I'm going to hit F12, and we're now at let's say this is the service itself, and here we can see all of the properties, such as whether or not we want to allow it to be paused, stopped, what are the dependencies, the display name, etc. Probably the few other ones to note before we go back to the slides are the service type and the start type and the wait hint. The first property, which or the most crucial property, is, as far as I would think, is the display name. This is the name of the service as you see it in the control manager. It is a string, can handle up to 256 characters. I wouldn't have that many, but you want to make sure that it contains something meaningful to what the service does. It can be helpful also to prefix, if you've got multiple services, maybe to prefix them with your company name or similar. The one thing I will say about a service is that within Delphi, that we cannot specify the service description, and if you want to do that, additional code needs to be, let's say, used or pulled from somewhere else. Dependencies are well, that's actually a container for other services or groups that you need to have started or want to have started before your service starts. So, for example, let's suppose you were uh, wanted to ensure the database manager was running before you started because you needed to establish a connection, or let's suppose that you needed to let's say required the TSP, which requires a telephony service. You want to make sure that the telephony service is running. These are things which you need to which need to be running before your service starts. And so what will happen then is when the Windows goes to start your service, if these services are not running, it will start them and then it will come back to your service to continue. Interactive services. Generally, these are today are seen as a no-no. Once upon a time, you might have code which would, let's say, start before Windows, so that's all fine. When the user logs in, could present a user interface to the user, giving some sort of feedback as to what was happening. Today, and obviously then if it were to be interactive, when the user logged off, you'd have to make your screen also vanish or close. This particular setting really only has any effect if you are just writing a Windows NT service and as opposed to a device driver. So, and again, it if you were to look at that page referenced on the bottom here about enable service logon SM, it is not recommended, to use this particular setting here. The type of service we're writing is also important. It can be one of three values. We can either be writing a just a standard, let's say, standard Windows service. It could be writing a device driver, or we could be writing a file system driver. The default setting is a Windows 32 service, and you can pretty much, unless you are doing something lower level, just leave it the way it is. And if you want to know more about what happens underneath, you can have a look at this particular page on the Microsoft website about the create service API call. The start type. When you look in the Windows Control Manager, for instance, there is a column there which specifies like whether it will be it's disabled, or it starts manually, or starts automatically, etc. So if a service is marked as automatic, or in the object inspector is set to ST Auto, then then your service will start automatically and will be started by the Service Control Manager when the system boots up, or sometimes shortly thereafter. There is an actual an order, like certain device drivers get loaded before everything else, but suffice to say, at boot up, your service will be started. A disabled service is a service that cannot be started. A manual service is a service that the control manager will start when the start service function gets called. So, for instance, if my service is set to manual, it is off until I explicitly start it somehow. And then the last two settings here are boot and system settings. These are for device drivers. The wait hint is perhaps one of the more important settings, I would say, in relation to writing a service or when the service starts up. This is the amount of time that can elapse between, let's say, a start, stop, pause type event operations, and the service setting status with the Windows API. When you, let's say, went with any one of these actions, normally, if you're in this service control manager and you were to, let's say, start a service, if you ever see a message that says something along the lines of this service has failed to respond in a timely fashion, that typically means the service or your service has that wait time period has expired, and the program didn't, or the service did not tell Windows that it was still starting up, or it was actually doing some work. The way that you then stop Windows from, let's say, outputting a message like that to the user is sometime within that wait hint period you would call report status, and that sort of resets that timer. The default value in Delphi is 5 seconds, and again it's important to note that Delphi does provide a lot of the framework, so we don't need to worry about some of these complexities. So just to give you an example of a wait hint operation, let's suppose our service was starting up. We needed to make a database call to get a list of objects out of the system, and for each object do something with that before before the service actually started. So we might have a typical loop where we or query that opens. We do something with the row returned. We can then call report status before going on to the next record. In this particular scenario, or this particular case here, Windows will just keep chugging along, and you won't get the message about not responding in a timely fashion. And once let's say the start operation has completed, then everything is sweet to go. Going into the main unit, you can see I've added a timer in here, and for the display name, you can see that I've named it file purger service. I can put spaces in here if I want to, so let's do that. Because I don't specify, we're going to see this in a minute, but because I don't specify the start name or a password, the service will run under the local system account as opposed to a specified user. Now, the local system account, let's say, has certain restrictions on it, like it can't access, the network can't see shares, and so on. You'd need to look at the Windows documentation about that, whereas if you were to run it under a user account, then whatever permissions the user has, you get. The service type here, I've left that as a Windows 32 service, because that's what it's going to be. It's nothing, we're not writing anything special that requires more permissions than that. The service type here, we'll leave that as auto. Keep in mind that when a service is set to start automatically, it does not start straight after you've installed it. You would then have to run it manually. The wait hint, I've left that at 5,000, but again, if you are doing intensive operations when the service starts or stops or is paused, you might want to consider increasing this value to something else. If we go look at some of the code here, this is the boilerplate code that was added by Delphi when the service was created, and I think now what we will do is go back to the slideshow now and have a look at what the events are that we might want to be setting or using. There are events for pausing, or for continuing, or stopping, or starting a service. So the start event occurs when the service first starts and happens before an on execute event. A on stop event occurs when the service control manager, let's say when the service is stopped. So You may be opening up devices when the service starts, and if that is the case, then when the service is stopped, then you might close them down. For more information on the other events, then there's a link there to the wiki site there for Delphi. We're going to look more closely now at the onStart event. It has two parameters, the first one being the sender, which is the service, which is essentially will be self. And then we will, there's a flag to indicate whether or not the service started. It's this for me is typically used to initialize, anything that the service might want to use before it is actually running. If you are now, just to give you an example of this, let's say, here I would be, if I'm writing, say, a service which, again, we're talking about data capture, shall we say, we might create a thread which, handles that particular task, and the creation of that thread and maybe the starting of that thread would be done in the onStart event. Note that if the service cannot be started, then what we would do is to set started to false, and then we can log that, or write a message to the Windows log. At the very beginning of this presentation here, I mentioned that even though we don't have a user interface to present to the user, we do need to somehow convey information to Windows, to the user, about what's happening. One way of doing this is through the Windows event log. And and what I'm saying here also is that even if I would go so far as to say that when your service is started, I would also write a message to the Windows log to say, hey, I've started, everything's okay. There's nothing worse than for, let's say, network admin to come and say, ooh, why wasn't this service started? Let's say a half a day later, and realize information has been lost. The next event we're looking at here is the onStop event. Again, we have a sender and a stopped parameter. The stopped parameter is a var parameter. This service, or this particular event handler, is called when the service is stopped. And when the service is stopped, then we will want to take specific action, like closing off any devices we may have opened, freeing memory, or terminating threads, etc. If the service cannot be stopped, then we would say that, hey, we can't be stopped, and Windows can then report that it's stopping or still running, depending on how it's handled. Also, if the service is then actually stopped and it's successful, then we can log that, make sure that message gets logged to the Windows event log, so that the network admin knows what's happening on his computer. Again, there are other events which allow you to pause and continue to continue a service, and for those particular events, I would suggest that you go and have a look at the Delphi pages on writing a service. In the previous two slides, we've talked about writing messages to the Windows event log. The function to do that is the log message function. You'll see that the last three parameters are have defaults. The second parameter is the event type, which basically tells you whether or not it's an error event, a critical event, a warning, informational auditing, or whatever else. So by default, the message or the event type is an error type, so you may be setting that unless you have written your own functions to say information message versus warning versus whatever else. So And for more information about the event types, then you can have a look at that particular page there to get more information. Okay, so what we're looking at here are the the server states, and we're going to look at basically how the Windows interacts with our service and how our service interacts with therefore Windows. So once the service has been installed, it's we start off in a stop state here on the left hand side, and basically then when the service is started and goes into a start pending state, then that's when our on start code is executing. And once our code has finished or is completed, the service goes into a running state. If the service could not start, well, obviously it would still be stopped. Once it is in a running state, then you may want to then stop the service, and in which case then the service goes into a stop pending state, and that's when our on stop code gets executed, and when it completes, then the service is in a stopped state again. So these and in this diagram here, these are the lines that are marked in black. When the service is running, we may also want to, there may be a case where the service needs to be paused. That is that is akin to, let's say, hitting a pause button in watching a game on your TV, or maybe watching a movie, where you don't want to destroy anything, but you just want it to stop doing anything, and in which case it goes into a pause pending state. And if you had an event handler for an on pause event, then that code gets executed, and on completion of that code, the service is then in a paused state. To get it to run again, you would hit the continue option, and it goes into a continue pending state. Again, the on continue code of the service would then be executed, and once that's finished, the service is back in a running state. These are indicated by the grey lines on the diagram, and these are infrequently, used, in Windows, because the most common ones are the start and stop. So basically, you can see here, or from this diagram then, how Windows will interact with our service by user actions to, let's say, start or stop the service, and how where our code gets executed. And then in a similar manner, you can also see how our Delphi code is used or interacts then with the environment, and why things like using report status when our service is starting becomes very important. So we'll go on to the next slide now. So let's go and look at these particular events here in the service which we are writing. So if we just jump up to the top here, you will see that I've got an event handler to start a service, and an event handler to stop a service, and then I've just got some other settings below there. If we go, and I also note here that we do have a timer as well. So what's going to happen is the timer will be set to run periodically, and what it will do is to monitor certain directories for files which are older than a certain number of days, and if they are older than a certain number of days, then those files will be removed from the computer. This would be akin to maybe when I was, way back when I was at university, And the network admin people might have a function to purge, students, directories that, let's say, or temporary directories containing student files on a semi-periodic basis. So um, if we go and look at our start event here, then what I'm actually doing is to say I'm going to start the timer, and I'll say that it was successful, and like I said, I am logging an information type message. The next event you'll see just straight immediately underneath that is a stopped event where I'll say stopped equals true, and then I'm just going to again log an informational event. You looking at these two events here, you might say, well, I don't need that code there because it's not really doing anything. True, but in the context of a larger service where threads do get created, or you are working with, let's say, a multi-threaded type service, putting code into these events becomes important. And I may even put something like if I had exception handling in here, I may say started equals false, and it can do what it wants. You'll also, just as a side note, you'll see here that I have specified that we are using information type events. And if we go and look at those, it's going to come up now. You can see here it's in the WinAPI.Windows unit. You will see here the different types of events: a success event, a error event, a warning event, an information event, audit success, and audit failure. So jumping back to where we came from, then you'll note here that the timer will, like I said, I've set that to run after a certain interval, and what will happen here is when it runs, it's going to be doing something which we'll cover in a short bit, and then the timer gets restarted, etc. Once you have reached, or once you've added, say, those events in now, you are at the point where you can consider adding code into install your particular service. Then you can do it through the Service Control Manager as a command line app. You can do it through a custom installer if you had such, or you can, or we can actually, Delphi provides code which allows you to run your program from the command line to perform the install and uninstall part sections. Also note that in our particular case here, services typically will be using have configuration settings. In our case, I'm not worried about having any particular user interface for that, but it will be just an ini file, which we will use Notepad to set up, say. But it is something else that needs to be considered when you write your service, and how will the user maintain any of the settings and configuration information. So if we want to install our service, what we will use is we can run our program with a /install as a command line parameter. And for example, we could say my service space /install, and that would then install the service. You then get a confirmation message if the service was successfully installed. There is also a /silent command line option which you can use to suppress that visual indication that the service was successfully installed. the next action, shall we say, if you are wanting to, if you are, let's say you are testing the installation of your service, etc., then the next action you would want to take would be to uninstall the service, and you can do that with the /uninstall command line parameter. And by the way, you can use a dash or a slash as the on the command line. So we can say myservice.exe, minus uninstall, and again, like the installation command, we can also run this silently, which suppresses the message that indicates the service was removed. For each of these commands, then, you need to also be running as an administrator account, because if you're running as a regular user, they typically won't have the necessary permissions to be able to install or remove a service. So what we'll do now is go to we'll go to the Services Control Panel applet, and we will also pull up a command line, and let's see what we have here. So at the moment, our file purging service is not in our services list, and we are now going to install it. So it's filepurger.exe/install. We get a message, and again we could use a silent to suppress that. Hit the OK button, and now if we go back into the Services Control Panel applet, refresh our list, you can see here that our service has been installed. Again, note the startup type is set to automatic, and it is currently not running, as I said before. We would need to start it up in order to get it into a running mode. The next function here is to uninstall, so I'll show that before we go back into Delphi. If we were to run the uninstall, use the uninstall command line parameter, you can see here how we've got an information message to say our service was uninstalled successfully. Keep in mind, all of this code here has been provided to us from Delphi. We haven't had to write anything at all, really, except we'll come up to our service in a moment. We go back to here, hit the F5 button. Our service is now gone. Now, here's the fun part. So I'm actually going to install the service again. And the reason is because once the service has been installed, providing the name isn't going to change, we can now change our program within Delphi, say, and compile it and then somehow debug it. So what we're going to look at now is some of the other code behind the timer and what it will do, and we're going to start looking at debugging in how we can debug our Windows service to work out when things are going wrong. By the way, I'm not trying to take over any debugging session, but some of this stuff here is important when it comes to writing an NT service. So we're going back here into Delphi now. So what is our service doing? I said at the very beginning that we were going to write a service which will delete files which are older than a certain number of days. So to do this, what I'm doing is that every time this timer runs, I'm going to read the new settings. I'm going to do something here. If I've got a number of days and I've got at least one directory to look at or monitor, then something's going to happen where those files that meet the criteria will be removed. And then if that was successful, we will the timer gets restarted. If that doesn't work, well, then I'm going to log a message, and this message here will go into the Windows event log and provides the user with information as to what's happened or what went wrong. You will also notice here that I have some debug events. These are important, let's say, for you as a developer, whether or not you have them on site, whether or not they're controlled by configuration entry or not, that's totally up to you. So typically what I've got here is that, if we just go up to the top. So basically, once we've read our configuration, I am going to, let's say, write out to the Windows debugger, information, about what's happening here. So when we look at the configuration settings used by the program here, we can see that I'm telling myself, say, when the service was, how many days I'm looking at, what directories am I monitoring, and like I said, that goes to the Windows event log. In here, in the timer, I know my timer's running. I can see, let's say, if it comes into here, it'll be doing something. So let's go into here. I will also typically log what parameters I am getting from somewhere else. So I'm logging the directory here and the time. And again, what we're looking here for are files which are older than a particular date and time, and we are going to they'll get put into a list, and then the files in that list will be iterated through and deleted because they're the ones which we've meet the certain criteria. I will point out, however, that at the moment I am not making the service to delete any files because I want to be able to, for the sake of this particular demonstration, be able to, repeatedly show what happens then. Now you'll see here, like I said, we're using a debug message. So my debug message, it is nothing fancy, I will say. All it's doing is the Windows output, or the output debug string function provided by Windows that we are using. So now, well, how do we see that? How do we see what's going to happen then? If we have a tool like let's say debug view, which you can get from, I think it's from Microsoft. I know there are plenty of similar tools which basically provide debugging functions. Then what we can do here is to find our service then that we had written. We can then, I'm just going to make sure that we need to enable the Win32 and the global Win32, and then when we start our service, something happens, say here, and I'm now going to turn off these things. Here is what my service did between on the start in between the start and an actual execution of the service. So in my settings here, I've seen older than 14 days. I'm looking at a temp folder. That was by that log settings function. And then it called the delete files older than. I can see what the parameters are that were being passed in. And these here are the files that met the criteria. That function ended and it went back to the timer. So looking like a winner so far. What I can now, if you go back into the services control panel applet, it is still running. That's okay. However, if that is the case, then we will have a problem with compiling our program. So what we would do after, let's say, running our program or doing some testing, we can just stop the service and then go back into our Delphi environment for debugging, for programming purposes. the Windows event. Now the next thing we need to cover then is the Windows event logs. So we'll go here. You would have noticed in our service how we were using the log message function to say that our service has started or stopped. Now for these particular messages, we need to go into the details tab here to look at what information was provided, to that log message call, and here you can see that. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of this particular session, and what I'm going to do is provide a summary of some of the things we've spoken about, and if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. So basically what I want to say is that the Delphi's T service provides a good framework for writing a Windows service, because it encapsulates much of the complexity involved in writing a service, and it makes it easy, or provide not easy but a good starting point for the development of the service, because it already provides us with the code for handling the pausing, starting and stopping, etc. I'm just trying to get to here. So it provides us with allows us to write the event handlers for these different parts of the service. It provides us with error handling functions. It also gives us code to allow our service to be installed or uninstalled. And if you were to bundle that into an installer, it means you don't need to add any real code per se to the installation, except to run your service with the install command line parameter. It also provides us with properties here, which we can use to set the display name or the wait hint, which again, while it may seem like not much, it provides another level of convenience in writing the service. And you've also got that it allows for dependency management. So again, but also while it provides us with these functions here, the things that we can't do with an NT service is to provide a service description, and nor could we make it really into or easily make it into a service that's like a delayed start. The difference between, let's say, an automatic service versus a delayed start is that all the services which are automatic run first. After then, you would have the delayed start ones running. So basically, once you've got your service running, also think about what threads you need. If you need to use threads or not, and if you are using threads, make sure that you use them correctly and terminate them if your service has to stop. Make sure that you include comprehensive error handling, so that to prevent the service from failing and stopping. Similarly, to provide you with sufficient information to allow you to troubleshoot problems. The other thing which is also important when it comes to using Delphi and writing a service is to get familiar with, or be familiar with, the let's say units like the system unit, the classes unit, the sysutils, and the WinAPI unit. These particular units have a lot of functions which can be used for things like file I/O, error handling, string manipulation, etc. And in this service here, if I could by illustration here, this function here comes straight out of the Windows API. That's output debug string. With the delete files function, so actually this one comes from T directory, but it comes from think this one comes from system.io utils. So, and allows us also to provide a predicate function to filter out what we don't want to keep. It saves you from writing, it saves you from having to write, let's say, unnecessary code which your service might be using. And, if, all being well, we can trust their code rather than having to write our own code which does, let's say, the same thing. With that in mind, also because of the problems with, let's say, with not so much with optimization, but that is important, performance considerations, make sure you are using efficient algorithms and data structures so that you are, again, not bogging down system resources, whether that's an SQL database or the CPU. And of course, with any project, try and reuse code where possible, because code that's been used and tested before makes your life a bit easier. So that concludes the this particular session. Thank you for watching. Thank you to the makers of Delphi and CBuilder for giving me this opportunity to speak on about writing an NT service. I hope you were able to get a few things out of this, and I hope you have fun with your coding now and in the future. And if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much. Bye.
I really must change that background that says the stream will start shortly, but I automatically put it on at some point and I forgot to take it off. Well done. Tim Coates also calls himself the Silver Coder. And I have some good news. Tim is with us live, despite the fact it's like 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. or something like that. And let me swap you in. There you go. Actually, producer Martha did that. Tim, now you have been introduced to the behind-the-scenes things that go on in the webinars, and I hope it was good for you. I appreciate you doing the video. It's a lot of effort. I know how much goes into these things. People don't realize that 1 hour of video actually takes you much longer. I don't know. Maybe you're really super slick here, but it takes me a lot of time.
No.
What time is it? What time is it over there for you?
Right now, it is 2:54 a.m.
Ooh, okay. that's
I did
pretty,
this just for you.
Tough. Yeah, well, it's 11:54. Martha says there's my video's blurry. All I can say is my video's looking fine to me. So Martha, maybe it's just you. Producer Martha is sending me secret messages in the background. Honestly, let's hope my video picks up in a second. Okay, well, I really liked your session, Tim.
Thank you.
And in fact, we can tell the world now. I think people are starting to scan your code, which is actually up there. But you are now an Embarcadero MVP as of about 2 days ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would have been about that. Yeah, and thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I mean, the main reason behind that was I've been following your videos on YouTube, and people should, there you go, people should go to that channel. It's if they scan that barcode, it will take them directly to your channel. I think I've also got a link for it somewhere. Let me see if I've got it as well, because I've got all sorts of exciting things. I don't have one typed in at the moment, but if they go to there, they'll see it.
At SilverCoder70.
There you go. YouTube. So youtube.com at SilverCoder70. Yeah. And Tim, he records a lot of content. Yeah, no, same as me. But you record quite a lot of content. I was very interested to see that you use Debug View as well for the login, because actually I use Debug View as well, and I thought I was one of the few people that thought it was great. But the more I come across people like you, I find that it's one of those things that's essential. Do you use it a lot, or is it a recent thing for you? Or
No, it's been around forever, as far as I'm concerned. I think I would have started. Look, for NT services for me would have started in about 2000 and something. We'll say, very early. Because before then it would have been, I can't remember what I would have done before then, but before then it was TSRs, but we'll skip over that. So look, it's very early in the piece that you need something where you can, let's say, be able to pop your service into, let's say, debug mode and be able to see what it's doing.
Yeah,
So I think those sorts of tools become crucial to um, knowing what your program's doing, whether it's in a development environment or whether you can have to do it live not live, but on a customer side.
yeah, yeah. I mean, actually, I have to write quite a lot of services as well, and that's exactly why I use Debug View, because you can do it in the IDE, and there's different ways of connecting up, debugging and
Mm.
stuff like that. But Debug View just makes it easy. I don't know whether I mean, like myself, you're a little bit older than 21, shall we put it that way? Did you ever have those monitors that used to sit next to your screen? The monochrome. So you're looking as if you don't know what the heck I'm talking about. Maybe I'm even older than I think. But you used to have these kind of green screen monitors, and what you could do was plug it into
Yeah.
the back of a PC with a separate video card, and it was like I forget what they were called, not sound blaster type things, but you could plug it in, and that was your debug viewer. It printed it out to that
Oh,
screen,
no.
and that's where debug view comes from. It's actually, you can physically plug in a second monitor into a PC, and it's like a kind of dumb terminal, and all it shows is the text output from debug view. I don't know whether you
Hmm.
know that, but
No, I
debug view
didn't.
is just the graphics equivalent of that. So,
Mm.
well, there
Hey,
you
I
go.
just want to. I just had there's an early question there by, I think it was Paul, asking about services on other platforms. My only
Right.
comment to that one really is, if you're going to be looking at, let's say, something like Linux, it's going to be a daemon, and no, you don't have to do all the magic you do on Windows to make things work. A Linux daemon is essentially just a program that gets pushed into the background. So I'm going to say nothing really special there.
Yeah. And Paul's a fellow Aussie as well, by the way.
I
So,
know.
yeah, you know him, do you?
Oh, no. He sent me an email tonight about something else. So, we've been
Oh, okay.
we've been trying to catch up, over the last days.
Yeah, I actually somewhere, I know where I've got it, but oh, here it is. Uh, this is going to blow your mind. Because on my shelf, I have to put it on my shirt, otherwise it won't show up. But that is the Australian Delphi user group. Martha says my video is blurry, so maybe it won't show up. But it's a Australian Delphi user. Oh, see, it's not going to work now. Australian Delphi
No,
user
you
group
can see it. Mm.
mug. Yeah. So that came all the way from Australia, and that was one of the guys from Nexus DB who will be talking at some point as well. But he was over in Amsterdam and handed it to me when he was there. So, and that has travelled a long way, and I was very careful to make sure it came back. Well, look, we have to go to Richard next because we kind of messed up the sessions. But I just wanted to thank you first of all for staying up and
Yep.
still being awake,
I woke up.
and
Yep.
hopefully, yeah, hopefully you get to go back to sleep at some point. I
Oh, that
really
is
enjoy
my
your stuff
intention.
on you. Yeah, well, I really enjoy your stuff on YouTube, and I look forward to we're going to bump into each other as you become more active as an MVP in our little secret MVP cabal groups that we
Mm,
have and stuff like that. But keep doing what you're doing because you're very
yeah.
popular. And
If I could just ask one thing, if people do have
sure.
any ideas about what they might like to see for videos, feel free to let me know at least. Otherwise, make it work through the network somehow so it gets to me, because basically the content is only good if it's works for you or the people in the community. So yeah, please let me know.
And if they email me and mention you, if they say, "Oh, it's the Australian guy who talked about the services," if I can't remember who you are exactly, but if you want to send a message to Tim, I'll make sure they get passed on as well. So I haven't got Tim's email up on the screen, but we'll make sure to promote you. All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Solutions@gmail. So yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Tim.